I'm Tom Putnam, Director of the John F. Kennedy Presidential Library and Museum, and on behalf of Heather Campion, CEO of the Kennedy Library Foundation, and all of my library and foundation colleagues, I thank you for coming and acknowledge the generous underwriters of the Kennedy Library Forums, lead sponsor Bank of America, the Lowell Institute, the Boston Foundation, and our media partners, the Boston Globe, Xfinity, and WBUR. In his newest book, The Road to Character, David Brooks introduces himself as, quote, someone who was born with a natural disposition towards shallowness, who is now paid to be a narcissistic blowhard. I'm sure many in this audience would disagree with that self-assessment. Devotees who read his columns or listen to his weekly jousts with two of this state's native sons, Mark Shields and E.J. Dionne, who, perhaps because they grew up in the shadow of the man we honor in this library, happen to be inclined towards the progressive side of political punditry. Weaving together personal insight, observations from social science, and fascinating biographical case studies, Mr. Brooks seeks in this new book to recover, quote, an older moral ecology, once handed down from generation to generation, that promotes the virtues of humility and suffering. As one reviewer quips, in the age of the selfie, David Brooks wishes to exhort us back to a semi-classical sense of self-restraint and self-suspicion. David Brooks is an op-ed columnist for the New York Times, a commentator for National Public Radio, and appears regularly on the PBS NewsHour and Meet the Press. He's also the author of numerous best-selling books. For our format this evening, Mr. Brooks will give a brief talk, take your questions, please come to the microphones, and then sign copies of the book, which is on sale in our bookstore. I don't wish to steal his thunder, but allow me to paraphrase a few lines from The Road to Character by way of concluding this introduction. Character is not innate or automatic. You cannot be the good person you want to be unless you wage a campaign to be more moral every day. You have to build character, he concludes, with effort and artistry, which must be said for David Brooks himself, a man who is the antithesis of the shallow narcissist he purports to be, and his new book unveils deep and lasting truths offered through his own example of dogged effort and thoughtful artistry. Please join me in welcoming David Brooks to our stage.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to be back on this stage, and thank you for that kind, though not well-informed introduction. It's true that I do these two shows on Friday, first with E.J. Dionne and then with Mark Shields. I'm willing to debate anybody as long as they're Catholics from Boston. I do a show, my segment with Shields, it's been, we call it Shields and Brooks. We thought they would call it Brooks Shields, that would be better, we would have got more audience. My other joke about Mark is, he's been doing it a little while, it's now, the segment is called Shields and Brooks, before that it was Shields and Shigo, Shields and Gergen, before that Shields and Coolidge. I think started out as, I think, Shields and Thomas Aquinas, something like that. But no, they're both, if you know them, and they probably like have apartments here. They're wonderful, wonderful guys. I've been at this venue many, many times, and I'll try to be brief. I know you didn't come here to hear me speak, you came here to hear yourselves speak. So I'll try to get out of the way of that. And it is probably, I'm guessing, just from my sociological expertise, a more progressive crowd than I am. Kennedy Library, Boston. I want you to know I did start out on the left. I lived in Greenwich Village in New York City. My parents were on the left for sure. In 1965, they took me to a be-in in Central Park where hippies would go just to be. And I was I was 5 years old, and one of the things they did was they set a garbage can on fire and they threw their wallets into it to demonstrate their liberation from money and material things. And I was 5, and I saw a $5 bill on fire in the garbage can, so I broke from the crowd, reached into the fire, grabbed the money, and ran away. And that was sort of my first step over to the right earlier in life. But I tried to stay within the progressive fold, I've lived all my life in the Northeast, moving either from New York City, Washington, D.C., to sort of upscale suburban progressive areas where everybody shops at Trader Joe's and Whole Foods, sort of progressive grocery stores where all the cashiers look like they're on loan from Amnesty International, you know, those stores. What we get in those stores is called Veggie Booty with Kale. It's for kids who come home and say, Mom, I want a snack that'll help prevent colorectal cancer. Do you have that? And so, at least in these suburbs, there are sort of two sorts of people I've studied. The first is the moms who've quit their jobs so they can make sure all their kids get into Harvard. And they come pick up their kids usually in Saabs and Audis at Volvos from elementary school, because in these progressive neighborhoods it's socially acceptable to have a luxury car so long as it comes from a country hostile to U.S. foreign policy. That's right. And the kids come in, and so the moms get out of the car. I call them these Uber moms, and you can spot them because they actually weigh less than their own children. The little moment of conception, they're doing little butt exercises to stay fit and trim. In the delivery room, they've got cutting the umbilical cord themselves, flashing little Mandarin flashcards at the things. They're married to the guys I've focused on, who are these generally older guys. They worked in hedge funds, Wall Street, very successful. They're now older and they've decided not to die. And so they've hired 3 or 4 personal trainers. They're doing a lot of workouts. They're popping Cialis-like breath mints. They're just throwing it back there. And by the time you see them, if you go out running here on the river, they've shrunk down now. They're like 4'6". They're like 90 pounds, covered in spandex. They sprint past you like it's like being passed by a little iron raisinette as they go past you. So anyway, this is my little sociology of progressive America. And so life is filled with these turns. And I shifted a little over to the right. The one thing in my life is I've always known I wanted to be a writer. I started at age 7. It's usually fortunate to know early on what you want to do. And so I read a book called Paddington the Bear, and I said at age 7 I want to do that. And I remember in high school I wanted to date a woman named Bernice. She didn't want to date me. She wanted to date some other guy. And I remember thinking, what is she thinking? I write way better than that guy. And so these are the things, little twists and turns in life. And some of them are comic, and some of them are uplifting. And the one uplifting thing which actually led to this book was I was driving home from the NewsHour with Lara and Shields about 10 years ago. And I drove into my home, which was then in Bethesda, Maryland, one of these progressive upscale suburbs, and sort of the Brookline of Maryland. No offense. And so I pull into the house, and it's a little like this a little later. It's a summer afternoon, and it's about 7:20, still light, and my kids are in the backyard. They're then 12, 9, and 5, and they've got a ball, which you get in the grocery store, and they're kicking it up in the air, one of those cheap 99-cent ball, and it's going up, and those things curve like crazy, so it's twisting back down, and they're running across the yard and toppling all over to be the first to tackle on the ball. And they're laughing, and they're having a great time. They're tumbling all over each other, and like the summer evening sun is coming through the trees, and the grass is beautifully green. And it's just one of those moments when you're surprised by this tableau of your happy kids. And it's a moment when life and time are suspended, when reality sort of spills outside the boundaries, and you get this feeling of overwhelming gratitude. So, what did I do to deserve this? And when you get that kind of unexpected moment, almost of a joy that you never get on the workplace, that never happens. Not this kind of joy. And it gives you a glimpse of that joy. It opens you up a little, so your heart enlarges a bit. And you get a strange stirring to be worthy of these kind of transcendent moments. And you want to be up to it. And you can have that kind of moment in a moment of happiness like that. You can also have it at a moment when you meet somebody who radiates an inner light. And we've all met these people, they just radiate light. I was fortunate enough earlier, about a year ago, to be seated next to the Dalai Lama at a Washington luncheon, and he's someone who just radiates light. And he's the sort of guy who, through our lunch, he laughed at unexpected moments. You just break out into laughter, and like you want to be polite, so you laugh along with him, and then he laughs and you laugh. And you want to insert a joke somewhere just so there's some justification for the laughter. But I was actually weirdly uncomfortable because he was always laughing. And so I didn't know what to say to fill time. So he has a little canvas Dalai Lama bag. And so I asked him, "You got any candy in there?" And so he pulls the bag on the table, puts it out, and he starts pulling out everything that's in the bag. It's everything you get in the first-class cabin of an international flight. And so he's got the ear muffs, the little eye shades, the little toothbrush, little razor. And then he pulls out a Toblerone gar. So he actually did have candy in there. But he's the guy with the inner light. And he's a global celebrity. But sometimes it happens that it's somebody who's just normal, like the rest of us. I was up in Frederick, Maryland, and I went to a room where there were about 30 women, they're aged 50 to 80 maybe, and they teach immigrants English and then how to read. And there's a process that can take like years and years, so they have amazing patience. And you just walk into the room, and you get this feeling of their goodness, their service, they're unpretentious, they're not putting on airs. When you walk in, believe me, they didn't know me from Adam, and they just make you feel valuable. And they radiate such a goodness, such a settledness, such a rootedness. They have these quiet, steady voices. They're not thinking about what good work they do. They're not thinking about themselves at all. And so I've achieved way more career success than I ever thought I would. But when I meet people like that, I think, well, I haven't achieved that. That I have not achieved. And so I've figured you only have one life. You'd like to get a little closer to that. And so the way I thought about it is, and the way I describe it in the book, is there are two sets of virtues, which I call the eulogy virtues and the resume virtues. The resume virtues are the stuff you bring to the workplace, make you a good teacher, journalist, whatever it is. The eulogy virtues are the things they say about you after you're dead, whether you're courageous, brave, honest, honorable, capable of deep love. And we all know the eulogy virtues are more important. We'd all rather have that. But we have an educational system and a culture that emphasizes the resume virtues. And so we sometimes get distracted from the things that matter to us most and get inarticulate about what matters to us most. And a book that helped me think about this was a book written here in Boston by a guy named Rabbi Joseph Soloveitchik called Lonely Man of Faith, which came out in 1965. And Soloveitchik says we have two sides of our nature, which he calls Adam 1 and Adam 2. Adam 1 is the resume side, the career side, ambitious side of our nature. Adam 1 wants to build things, create, produce, and discover things. And there's nothing wrong with that. We should have successful, ambitious lives. Adam 2 is the internal Adam. That's the eulogy Adam. Adam 2 wants to embody certain moral qualities, wants to have a strong inner character, solid sense of right and wrong, not only to do good, but to be good. So while Adam 1 wants to conquer the world, Adam 2 wants to obey a calling and serve the world. Adam 1 asks how things work. Adam 2 asks why things exist and what ultimately we're here for. Adam 1 wants to venture forth. Adam 2 wants to be anchored in the rooted home of a family meal or friends around a bar. And sometimes these two things go together. If you have a strong inner character, you're likely to develop strong relationships, and that could help you at work. But sometimes they diverge, and sometimes the demands of character interfere with work. I have a friend who hires a lot of people, and he asks them this question in the interview process: name a time you told the truth and it hurt you. He wants to make sure they're willing to sometimes put Adam 2 in front of Adam 1. And sometimes I would say the two Adams are different from each other in that they're developed through a different logic. Career success follows an economic logic, which is straightforward. You learn a skill, you can practice a skill. Effort leads to reward. Practice makes perfect. Pursue self-interest, pursue utility. Adam 2 operates by a moral logic, not an economic logic, which is paradoxical and inverse. You have to surrender to something outside yourself to gain strength within yourself. You have to give to receive. You have to conquer your desire to get what you crave. Success can lead to the greatest failure, which is arrogance and pride. Failure can sometimes lead to the greatest success, which is humility and learning. In order to fulfill yourself, you have to forget yourself. In order to find yourself, you have to lose yourself. And so we live in a culture, as I say, that nurtures Adam 1, the external Adam. It's a competitive society. You've got to spend a lot of time in your career to get ahead. We live with fast and shallow communication that makes it harder to hear the still voice inside. We live in a culture for the last 50 or 60 years at least has taught people how they're wonderful inside. Love yourself. You're wonderful. The commencement cliches are all follow your passion, be true to yourself, trust yourself, march to the beat of your own drummer. A lot of self-love. And so we've developed a broadcasting personality. We've told a couple generations they're great, and they believed us. In 1950, the Gallup organization asked high school seniors, are you a very important person? And in 1950, 12% said yes. They asked the same question in 2005, and it wasn't 12%, it was 80% who said yes. And so that's a shift in the culture. Psychologists have a thing called the narcissism test. They give people a bunch of statements and they say, does this apply to you? And they're statements like, I find it easy to manipulate people because I'm so remarkable. Somebody should write a biography about me. I love to look at my body. And the media's narcissism score has gone up 30% in the last 20 years. With this increase in narcissism has gone up an increase in fame. At UCLA, they asked college freshmen, what do you want out of life? And for many, many decades, the number one answer was always, I'd like to have a meaningful philosophy of life. That's now 16th. Financial security is number one. And number 2 or 3 is often fame. So people just want to be famous a lot more. They did a survey of junior high school girls. Would you rather be a celebrity's personal assistant, Justin Bieber's personal assistant, or president of Harvard? And of course, by 3 to 1, they'd rather be Justin Bieber's personal assistant. Though to be fair, I asked the president of Harvard, and she would rather be Justin Bieber's personal assistant. Another survey, the one I like, is they asked college students, would you rather have a life that leads to a lot of fame or a life that leads to a lot of sex? And by 2 to 1, they chose the fame. And so I go to college campuses, I say, listen, I'm on TV twice a week, I'm read a column for a prominent paper, I'm kind of famous, go with the sex, it's better. Go with the sex. But if you live that life and you don't work on your weakness, then you lose a moral language. There's a sociologist at Notre Dame named Christian Smith who goes around to college campuses and asks students, name your last moral dilemma. And 70% can't name a moral dilemma. They say, you know, I pulled into a parking space, but I didn't have enough quarters. He says, well, that's a problem. It's not really a moral dilemma. And they just haven't been given the vocabulary of how to do it, how to think about a clash of moral values. Google Ngrams measure the words we use in our newspapers, our magazines, and our books. Total word usage over decades. And there's been a sharp increase in economic words and a sharp decrease in moral words. The word bravery is down in usage 66%, gratitude down 49%, humbleness down 52%, kindness down 56%. We're just talking about it less. And so I found if you are all resume, you turn into sort of a shrewd animal. You lack a quality of inner depth. You're unable to speak with a sophisticated moral language. You suffer from an unconscious boredom because you're not really attached to high ideals. And it's true in my life. You received all these great gifts, but you get a sort of self-satisfied moral mediocrity. You grade yourself on a forgiving curve. You approve of yourself. You think, well, I'm not really hurting anybody. People seem to like me. I must be okay. But slowly a gap opens up between the person you'd want to be and the person you are. You're not really deserving the eulogy you'd want, and you don't have that inner light that you saw. And so I set out 5 years ago to figure out how that inner light is developed, how moral growth happens, how moral education happens. Because I thought, well, you got to develop character, but I didn't really have any logistics of how it actually happens. And so I didn't want to write a philosophy book. I don't believe in philosophy. I believe in people. We learn from each other. We learn from people. And a friend of mine wrote an email to me. He said, what a wise person teaches is the least of that which he gives. It's the totality of their life and the way they go about it in the smallest detail that gets communicated. We think about your teachers. You don't remember what they say, but you remember how they were. You remember the totality of experience. And so, for example, I'm not a Catholic theologian, and I don't know much about what Pope Francis has done for the church, but I sort of know how he conducts himself. The message is the person. And so I gathered 10 or 11 people who at age 20 were deeply unimpressive, but by age 70 were amazing. And I just want to know what they did and what sort of activities they did. One of those people was a woman named Ida Eisenhower. She was born in 1862 in Shenandoah, Virginia. Her mother died when she was 5, her father when she was 11. She was an indentured servant, basically, for a neighboring family working as assistant cook. When she was a teenager, they left to go on a picnic. She just walked away. She walked all the way to Staunton, Virginia, got herself through high school, decided she wanted to go to college, got herself on a caravan to Kansas, got through university. This is all a single woman in the 1870s, 1880s, and then gave birth to 6 boys, one of whom was Dwight Eisenhower. And when little Dwight was 9, he wanted to go out trick-or-treating, and Ida would not let him. She said, "You're too young." And so he threw a temper tantrum, punched the tree in his front yard, punched it so bad he rubbed all the skin off his fingers. Ida sent him to his room, had him cry for an hour, and came up to him to recite a verse from Proverbs, which was, "He that conquereth his own soul is greater than he who taketh the city." And 60 years later, when Eisenhower wrote his memoirs, he said that was the most important conversation of his life, because it taught him that he had a weakness in himself, which is temper. He had a bad temper problem, and that he had to beat it. And so Ida was teaching him 2 things. One, humility. Humility is not thinking lowly of yourself. It's thinking accurately about yourself from a distance, knowing your strengths and knowing your weaknesses. And she was teaching him the importance of self-confrontation. Success is built by taking advantage of your strengths and competing with the outside world. Character is primarily built by being aware of your weaknesses and being a little better at them day by day. And so Eisenhower spent his life combating that temper. He was an unimpressive cadet at West Point, but slowly, through force of personality and effort, he turned himself into something better. Even in World War II, at nights, we think of him as this garrulous country club kind of guy, but at nights he was lying awake, anxiety attacks, insomnia, drinking, throat infections, spiking blood pressure, hating people. But he knew he could not lead but from a position of cheerful confidence. So he defeated that, and he suppressed it daily and hourly. And some of the things he did were stupid. He hated people, so he wrote their names on pieces of paper over and over again, and then ripped them up and threw them in the garbage, just as a way to purge. And so that teaches us that as part of this process is the process of self-defeat. And so that's one thing. The second person I'll mention quickly is Samuel Johnson. Samuel Johnson barely survived the ordeal of his birth in 1709 in England. He was handed over to a wet nurse whose milk infected with tuberculosis, made him permanently blind in one eye, deaf in one ear. He developed smallpox, which left him scarred. They performed surgery on his jaw, which left a gouge in his face. They opened his arm to bleed him and left the wound open for 6 years. He soon developed what we think was Tourette syndrome, OCD, and so by 30, he was twisting about. He couldn't control his body, he couldn't control his mind. It was hard to eat with him because he was spewing food. Went to Oxford, failed as a student, opened up a school, failed. But what he did was he suffered. He led a life, as he wrote, that was radically wretched. But he turned suffering into something good. The theologian Paul Tillich tells us what suffering does, those moments of suffering. They take us beneath the surface of everyday life, and they remind us we're not who we thought we were. They carve into the basement of your soul, through the floor, revealing a cavity below, Tillich writes, and then below that, revealing a cavity below. They give you self-awareness, and they give you empathy. And so Johnson had both. And he developed out of that self-awareness a deep understanding of himself, and empathy for others who were suffering, and a rage for understanding, a belief that wisdom could be a moral enterprise through which you could give yourself integrity and control, and then a belief that writing could be an act of moral communication that would help other people be better. And so he developed this amazing curiosity Told that a piece of river, there were a lot of drownings in it, he jumped into that piece of river just to know what it felt like. Told that a pistol would explode if you put 2 musket balls into it, he put 7 balls in and shot it against a wall. He just had to understand. Everything he was afraid of, everything he suffered from, he wrote about. He just grabbed it by the ears and wrote about it. Whether it was sorrow, envy, guilt, boredom, everything that plagued him, he just investigated it and sort of tamed it through an act of moral philosophy. He was capable of great acts of friendship. A friend of his got a lectureship at Oxford teaching law, but unfortunately knew no law. So Johnson said, "I'll write your lectures for you." He wrote 60 lectures stretching over 1,600 pages of text. He was capable of great acts of industry. Between age 68 and 72, he wrote 52 biographies covering 378,000 words. And so he turned himself into something magnificent. When he died, a colleague said, "He has made a chasm which not only nothing can fill up, but which nothing has a tendency to fill up. Johnson is dead, let us go with the next best. There's nobody. No man can put you in mind of Johnson." And so that was an act through suffering of using wisdom and the hunger for knowledge as a moral force. Third person I'll mention is Frances Perkins. She was born on Beacon Hill here, April 10th, 1880, raised in Maine and in Worcester. And she came from, I don't think this culture is still the same, you can tell me, a New Englandish culture of, let's say, not emotional explosiveness. And so Perkins, when she was 12, her mom bought her a hat. And this is what her mother said to her upon buying her hat at age 12. Her mom was named Susan Bean Perkins from the Bean family of Maine. "There, my dear, that is your hat. You should always wear a hat something like this. You have a very broad face. It's broader between the cheekbones than it is up on top. Your head is narrower above the temples than it is at the cheekbones. It lops off very suddenly into your chin. The result is you always need to have as much width in your hat as you have in your cheekbones. Never let yourself get a hat narrower than your cheekbones because it makes you look ridiculous." So I don't know if that's Yankee culture, but it's a certain sort of tough upbringing. So she goes off to Mount Holyoke. And here's some of the rules. Class of 1902 at Mount Holyoke, probably different than Holyoke today. Freshmen should keep a respectful silence in the presence of sophomores. Freshmen meeting a sophomore on campus should bow respectfully. No freshman shall wear a long skirt or hair high on head until the mid-year examinations. So they were teaching deference. But they were also teaching character. Her worst subject was chemistry, so they made her major in chemistry, figuring if you could beat that, you can beat anything life throws at you. And the other thing Holyoke did was it instilled in the students a sense of heroic sacrifice. And so the phrase was, "Go where no one wants to go, do what no one wants to do." This 1902, they're sending young women to Iran, Pakistan, Western India, Africa to do mission work. And it's heroic journeys these women are taking. And in 1920, somebody did a census of all the female missionaries abroad, and something like 20% of them were Holyoke grads. It was just remarkable, and so we're just arming them with moral aspiration. Perkins does not go abroad. She goes to Chicago, works at a place called Hull House with Jane Addams. Then she goes to Philadelphia, comes to New York. She's doing sort of activist work, but a little unfocused, a little genteel, not that productive. 1913, she's having tea in one of the brownstones on the north side of Washington Square Park in Lower Manhattan. She hears a commotion. She rushes out, and she sees a fire. And she stumbled across one of the most famous fires in American history, the Triangle Shirtwaist Factory fire. She rushes over, and she thinks she sees them throwing bundles of clothing out of the 10th floor window. But they're throwing, it's like 9/11, they're opting to leap to their deaths rather than being burned to death. And she sees a guy helping one of the seamstresses over the windowsill and dropping her in to space, a second, a third, a fourth, who's his girlfriend. He kisses her, drops her, and then he himself goes. And that moment was what you might call her call within a call. She was already doing this sort of work, but after that moment, her ambition was purified and hardened. Her self was quieted. She would compromise with anybody, work with anybody, shed all gentility. She would do anything to advance the cause. And she became, over the next 50 years, she had this long obedience in the same direction. This was her life. And she went to Albany, became a lobbyist, an activist for legislation, but it was 1920 or so, and she's in Albany, and no one will take her seriously as a young woman. So she keeps a folder at home called Notes on the Male Mind. And she says, they won't take me seriously because I'm a young woman, but they all want to be loved by their mothers. So I'm going to remind them of their mothers. And she dresses like an 80-year-old woman, gray dress, pearls, tri-corner hat, old-fashioned hairstyle, calls her nickname Mama Perkins. And she passes amazing legislation, goes to work for Al Smith, goes to work for Franklin Roosevelt, then follows Roosevelt as the first female in the cabinet, Secretary of Labor, serves every day of his administration until the end. Little historical coda that I particularly like is she, at the end of her life, she's 80. She's poor, she needs money to work. So she gets a teaching job at Cornell. She's teaching, and she's still living alone though. And so one of the frat houses says, well, do you want to live with us in our frat house? And she says, I'm as happy as a bride on my wedding day. She goes off and lives there. They're having parties. She's sipping bourbon, sitting there in the midst of the parties. And she lives next door to the faculty advisor to the frat house, who's a man named Alan Bloom, who would later go on to write The Closing of the American Mind. And the president of the frat house that year, who became one of her pallbearers, was a man named Paul Wolfowitz, who was Undersecretary of Defense under Bush. So anyway, interesting little historical twists and turns. The final person I'll mention, anyway, she teaches us about vocation, about calling. We give our students such bad advice. We say, follow your passion. 80% of college graduates have no passion. But she did not find her calling by saying, what do I want from life? I've got to look inside me and find my passion. She asked, what is life asking of me? What problem is out there asking me to respond to it? So the answer's out there, it's not in here. The final person I'll mention is George Eliot, the great novelist. Grows up at the start of the Victorian era to a mother who's ill and therefore can't give her love, dies early. And George Eliot is emotionally needy. She needs love. If she's not the center of attention, she makes herself a scene. During her 20s, she falls in love with every guy she meets. Young, old, married, unmarried. She falls for a guy. He's not interested. And by age 30, she hadn't achieved much. She hadn't met anybody. She had not had an impressive life. She falls for a guy named Herbert Spencer, who's a great philosopher, her intellectual equal. And at the age of 32, she writes him a letter that's at once pathetic but also profound. The pathetic part of the letter is that the first 2/3, she's like begging him to marry her. It's like, please, please marry me. You won't even notice me around the house. I won't cause you any problem. If you don't marry me, I'm going to die. And so that sort of is not that great. The final paragraph is a little twist. She writes, I suppose no woman ever before wrote such a letter as this, but I am not ashamed, for I am conscious in the light of reason and true refinement that I am worthy of your respect and tenderness, whatever gross men or vulgar-minded women might say of me. I'm worthy of your tenderness. And so that's a moment you might call the agency moment, which I think happens to people in their 30s, where they stop relying on the outward praise and criticism of others, but they develop an internal criteria for their own behavior. And she develops that. It doesn't work out with Spencer, but she meets another guy named George Lewis. He's a writer too, and he's legally married, but he and his wife are long estranged, and his wife is living with another guy and has had 3 children with another guy. But this is Victorian England, and divorce is not an option, and if Eliot goes on to marry Luz, she will be considered an adulteress. And so she will lose all her friends, and her family will cut her off. And so she has to make the decision, do I want Lewis or do I want everybody else? And she goes with Lewis, decides for about a week, and then goes with him. She writes, I have counted the cost of the step that I have taken, and am prepared to bear without irritation or bitterness renunciation by all my friends. I am not mistaken in the person to whom I have attached myself. He is worthy of the sacrifice I have incurred. My only anxiety is that he should be rightly judged. They go off, and all hell breaks loose back home, but they are happy. And she reminds us of the power of love to take a woman or a man, anybody who's scattered and unanchored and uncommitted, and to bring them a deep commitment. And so the first thing love does is it humbles us. It reminds us we're not in control of our own minds. When we're in love, we've got intrusive thinking. We're thinking about the person all the time. Love's like an invading army you want to be conquered by. The second thing it does is it plows open hard ground, exposes fertile and fragile earth to give you more joy, but also more suffering. Third thing it does, it decenters the self. It reminds you your riches are not in yourself, but are in another. The fourth thing it does is it fuses one person to another. Montaigne wrote that love eliminates the distinction between giving and receiving. That when a friend consents to receive a gift, he's doing the greater favor by giving his friend the pleasure of giving it, because their selves are fused. And this is the sort of poetic, young, passionate love that Eliot experienced and that Taylor Swift sings about. But that's not the only thing she experienced. She was by now in her 30s. She was a little self-aware. She was aware of him. And there is what Roger Scruton, the philosopher, calls a second love that comes later in life, when you're a little less poetic, but a little more aware, a little wiser, a little embedded in commitments, and you're a love which is a little softer, a little deeper, and a little more permanent. And this love is realistic, this love is local, and this love is mature. A friend of mine gave a wedding toast celebrating this kind of love, a friend named Leon Wieseltier. He said in this wedding toast, "This love is private and it is particular. Its object is the specificity of this man and that woman, the distinctiveness of this spirit and that flesh. This love prefers deep to wide, here to there, the grasp to the reach. When the day is done, the lights are out, there is only this other heart, this other mind, this other face to assist in repelling one's demons or in greeting one's angels. It does not matter who the president is. When one consents to marry, one consents to be truly known, which is an ominous prospect. And so one bets on love to correct for the ordinariness of the impression and to call forth the forgiveness that will be required. Marriages are exposures. We may be heroes to our spouses, but we may not be idols." And so Eliot had this kind of love for Lewis and vice versa. A year or so into their marriage, or they're living together, he says to her, maybe you should write fiction. You might be good at it. And she goes away for a week, writes a short story, reads it to him, and he's crying. He knows immediately the talent she has. And after that, one could say that his love was in many ways the deeper and more profound love, because he puts his own career second. He was a writer too, but he knows her talent is way better than his. And he becomes her agent, her editor, her publicist. She's very sensitive to criticism, so he gets up early in the morning and reads all the articles in the paper, and if there's an article mentions her, he cuts it out so she won't have to see it. And their devotion to each other is measured in the inscriptions of the novels she wrote to him. Adam Bede in 1859, "To my dear husband, George Henry Lewis, I give the manuscript of a work which would never have been written but for the happiness which his love has conferred on my life." Felix Holt, 1866, "From George Eliot to her dear husband, this 13th year of their united life, in which the deepening sense of her own imperfectness has the consolation of their deepening love." Middlemarch, 1872, "To my dear husband, George Henry Lewes, in this 19th year of our blessed union." It's a story of someone stabilized by love, stabilized by a commitment. And so these and other people in the book have gone through certain experiences which we would say are part of a deeper life. But if we wanted to cast an umbrella over it, we'd say two things happen. One, they step inside the culture we have of the big me, the culture that you're wonderful inside, and they have a different culture, a different moral philosophy, which says we're not wonderful, we're divided creatures, both deeply broken and splendidly endowed. Two, the struggle against our weakness and sin is the central drama of life, not the external climb to success. Three, in this struggle, humility is the greatest virtue. Humility is accurate self-awareness. Humility is knowing you're an underdog in the struggle against your own weakness. 4, in this struggle, pride is the greatest vice. It blinds you to your own nature. Character is built over the course of your confrontation with yourself. No person can achieve self-mastery on his or her own. Reason, willpower are not strong enough to defeat self-deception and selfishness and self-centeredness. We all need redemptive assistance from outside, from friends, from community, from philosophers, from God. When I started this book, I used to think that character was this little iron Victorian figure of self-control inside the little core of the soul. But I came to think that character was the ability to form commitments. In the realm of the intellect, the person with character has firm convictions about fundamental truths. In the realm of emotion, she is embedded in unconditional loves. In the realm of action, she's committed to causes that can't be completed in a single lifetime. And so that's sort of a philosophical shift toward a position of being aware of your own weakness. More practically, the people in the book do certain things. First, they dive inside themselves. They keep journals. They say, what is my core sin? What's my core weakness? How did I do today in combating it? I have a friend who suffers from hardness of heart. He's busy. He's not always present for people. They come to him. He's thinking about the next appointment. He's at a meeting. Instead of really listening to what others say, he's thinking, what can I say that'll make myself appear clever? And so he sits in bed before going to sleep and think, well, how did I do today on this? How can I do better tomorrow? And so that's internal. But then they go external. They ask, who do I admire? How can I model myself after those people? Friends, living or dead? How can I have conversations that step outside the normal business and talk about suffering, talk about love, talk about vocation? And then how can I commit to something? And like the ladies in Frederick. And when you go that, you get this U shape. You occasionally see in these people moments of tranquility when nature itself seems to be celebrating what they do and they feel good about their souls. The ambitions of Adam 1 are never ending. There's always something else out there. The aspirations of the inner life can actually be satisfied. And so the final figure I'll introduce you to from the book is Augustine, who was born in Africa in 354. And he had a mom named Monica, who was the helicopter mom to beat all helicopter moms. And so she wanted to be with him all the time, tell him what to think, tell him what to go, tell him who to marry, tell him what kind of Catholic to be. He decides to escape her, so he takes a boat from Africa to Italy. She's on the shore screaming at him. She gets on the next boat, finds him down in Italy, tracks him down. And so they have this tempestuous relationship and overweening love from her. But finally, he goes through his confessions, his conversion. She's now 56. And she says to him, they're still in Italy heading back to Africa, you know, all my life I wanted you to be a certain sort of person and a certain sort of Catholic, and you are that now. And I thought I wanted to get back to Africa to die there, but God is everywhere. I can die here. It doesn't matter where I'm buried. And so I'm ready to go. And she does, in fact, die 9 days later. And he describes their final conversation, which takes place in a garden. And after a life of conflict, they merge together and they have sweet harmony. And they talk about the delight of the earthly senses, but then they talk about the next life. They talk about all the past leading up to the future. And he talks about we came to our own minds and went beyond them into the realm of pure spirit. And then he has a long sentence. And the sentence is very hard to read, but it's got one word that repeats itself through it. And that word is hushed. So he says that the sound of the birds were hushed, the sound of the wind in the trees was hushed, the sound of our voices was hushed, the sound of our breathing was hushed, the sound of our movements was hushed. And you just get the sense of this hushed, hushed, quiet, quiet. And in it, he describes this tranquility, a tranquility between people, a tranquility of soul. And that tranquility is dominated by feelings of gratitude and peace. And out of that, after battle, after struggle, after real moral education, you get that you're overwhelmed finally with gratitude, and out of that shines the inner light. And writing or reading a book doesn't get you there. You got to live it out. But that's what we're shooting for. Thanks very much. 2 microphones. I'm happy to talk about both subjects, Marco Rubio or Jeb Bush, whatever you guys want.
David, you are a member of an endangered species, a conservative who's a mensch.
Which is more endangered? Because there are a lot of conservatives.
You are extraordinarily admirable, and I'm wondering if you could share with us any conservatives who are also mentioned who are admirable.
Okay, next question. No, of course I can. So I keep a list of people in Washington who I really admire. Anthony Weiner, Elliot Spitzer. No, I'm just kidding. And some of them are conservative. And you know, I have a friend named Mike Gerson who was a speechwriter for President Bush, who really was one of the driving forces behind PEPFAR, the President's Initiative on AIDS in Africa, which is, you know, he helped save millions and millions of lives. A man of deep internal consistency. I have many. George Shultz is a guy 93 now who has served in various Republican administrations, another of my personal heroes. But I guess I would say this. One of the people I quoted here, Samuel Johnson, has a couplet, which I'm about to butcher. Of all the things that human hearts endure, how few are those that kings can cause and cure. That politics is important. We all are here because we like politics. We're active in politics. I write about it all the time. But there's a level of relationships that, and virtue, which is beneath that and more fundamental. And if one side has more good people than the other, that does not match my observations through life. I find there are many wonderful conservatives, many wonderful liberals, many schmucks on both sides. And that's true of professions. You can go into investment banking or you can go work for a charity. There are a lot of schmucks in the charity world. And there are a lot of good people in the investment banking world, at least some of them. No, that's true. It depends on how you lead a life.
Thank you. You didn't name one. Thank you.
Okay. John Barrasso, Senator from Wyoming, is a friend of mine.
I wish this were funny, but unfortunately it isn't, and you may have read this when I sent it to you last week. I wonder if you could comment on a college campus where 95% of the faculty and students think they have such great character that they couldn't wait to sign a petition condemning a professor of racism over a Facebook post he withdrew, and it was misinterpreted, and instead what they've done is defame his character and driven him to a medical leave. And it seems that character and free speech have both been turned on their head. And then the other issue simmering under the surface is that the professor's real offense is that he spoke up for Israel.
So I do think there's a whole series of cases coming out now that are where people are being punished for thought. And there's microaggressions, what they call microaggressions. And I have a friend named Kirsten Powers who has a book coming out on this in a couple of weeks called The Silencing, just a whole series of these stories. You know, I'm a writer, I believe, and I'm a conservative of the New York Times. And a lot of people are offended by what I write because the audience is more liberal. I liken being a conservative columnist at the Times op-ed page to being chief rabbi at Mecca. And so people are offended by me, and they write to me, and I'm frankly offended by them. But as part of the deal in life, I think you got to tolerate wide swaths of offensiveness. And I think it's almost always a mistake to hound somebody out of a job for some belief they have, even if you find it offensive. I think it's almost always a mistake to deny a speaker a platform or to take away that platform, just because I think we're all grown-ups and we can figure it out. And I do think there's something weird, and I don't understand it, I haven't thought about it, but there's something weird going on some college campuses, which is almost like, it reminds you a little of Salem, old Salem. There's some sort of drive for purity And somehow any deviation from that has to be punished to maximal effect. And so in general, while I sometimes object to what is said, what isn't, in general I'm for broad tolerance and latitude just to preserve the environment of the university. And I'll say one final thing. I teach at Yale, and I love Yale. I love you. I shouldn't say that around Cambridge, but I love you. And I hate Harvard. I just hate. No, I'm kidding. Yeah. But so every week, I take the train from Washington to New Haven, and I will tell you, there's more diversity of thought and more freedom to say what you want in Washington than in New Haven. And that's not the way college campuses are supposed to be.
And this campus is 45 minutes up the road.
Okay.
When I was 9 years old, the president echoed the words, ask not what your country can do for you, ask what you can do for your country. And to me, that's a commitment to be moral, to be part of your society. Instead, since then, we teach kids that they're the center of the earth and the sun and the moon rotate around them. And this is where this narcissism, I think, comes from. How do we mitigate this?
Yeah. Well, let me say two things. How do you mitigate the narcissism? I think you introduce people to themselves. I mean, I find my students, they're wonderful people. I love this younger generation of any sort, not just the Yale kids, of any sort. And they've been raised in this hyper-competitive way, but they hunger. They hunger for meaning. And they don't know how to get it. They know they don't have a moral vocabulary, but they are so eager to be given the language. And so, because they, more than other generations, I think they just hunger for meaning. And, what Kennedy offered with that speech was an inspiration to serve. And so I think it's more a question of educating them about what it feels like to be sinful. Some of these older moral vocabularies, and this is frankly what I do with my class. I say that history has left us a whole series of moral ecologies, different moral systems. There's the classical system of honor and courage of Homer. There's the Jewish system of obedience to law, a Christian system of grace and redemption and salvation. There's a scientific system of using the power of reason to find out what's right. I'm not going to tell you which to believe in, but here's all these systems. Pick one. And if you subsume and surrender yourself to a long tradition and realize the world was not born for you, you were born into a world with institutions that existed before you were born, they'll be here after you die. Your job is to serve those institutions and hopefully pass them off a little better. Then that puts you in the right frame of mind to defeat the narcissism, I think. The second thing I'll say, and this will be more controversial in this building. So John F. Kennedy makes one appearance in the book, and not in a good way. So he gives this speech, bear any burden, pay any price. And it's a speech that shaped a generation and inspired a lot of people to public service, so I'm not really criticizing it, I'm joking. But 3 days earlier, Dwight Eisenhower gives his farewell speech. And it's a very different speech. The Kennedy speech is, let's eradicate disease, a new generation, a new beginning. It's very utopian, and it's very lofty. The Eisenhower speech is very moderate, and it says politics is a competition between partial truths. And so we're not trying to eradicate everything, we're just trying to find the right balance. And he uses the word balance, I think, 19 times. The balance between freedom and regulation, the balance between big and small, the balance between achievement and equality, between security and liberty. We're just trying to balance things. And he says, I'm going to take a shot at the other side. He talks about his own side, the military-industrial complex and its dangers. He talks about the dangers of the scientific complex. And I think there's a beautiful wisdom in Eisenhower's speech, which says that politics is a competition between partial truths, and we're just trying to be moderate and seek balance. And that's a very different spirit than Kennedy's speeches, but the more and this is maybe what makes me a conservative, the more I see politics, the more I admire the moderation and the modesty of the Eisenhower speech.
Thank you.
Okay. So having just first thank you for your attention, for your time. It's actually a great honor to be here at this library where a statue of Mark Shields should be built. Thank you very much.